2025 A-Level Combined Mathematics Paper 1 Part A question number 9, the circle question. This question says, find the equation of the circles with radius 4 units and centers lying on the line 4x minus 3y equals 0 and touching the circle x squared plus y squared equals 1 externally. Now on the right side here, I've drawn a diagram that represents this situation, and I highly recommend that you yourself, when you're doing this kind of question, draw this kind of diagram because it will give you a better idea of what exactly you're doing. Now here, on the xy plane, I have drawn at the center the circle x squared plus y squared equals 1. You can see the unit circle centered at the origin like this. Now on either side of this circle, outside of the circle, we have two circles that are touching externally the circle x squared plus y squared equals 1. And you can see I have drawn the line 4x minus 3y equals 0. The circle centers are on that line, which satisfies this condition that we have here. I've also drawn the radii. You can see the central circle has radius 1 and the external circles have radius 4. Now this diagram is not to scale, but it doesn't need to be to scale. It just needs to illustrate the situation and allow you to think about it. So if we think about it, we can see that this point here, this center point, which I'm going to label as x1, y1, must lie on the line 4x minus 3y equals 0. Therefore, 4x1 minus 3y1 must equal 0. Similarly, if we consider this point here, which I'm going to label as, let's say we'll label it as x2, y2, then x2, y2 must also satisfy the condition that 4x2 minus 3y2 is equal to 0. So we can say, let x1, y1, x1, y1 and x2, y2 be the centers of the two circles. Now we need to write something like this because of course if you just draw the diagram, you're not properly defining these 2 points. But now that we've said this sentence, we have defined these points correctly to be the two centers of this circle and this circle. Now if we consider the situation here, we can see that since x1, y1 and x2, y2 lie on the line 4x minus 3y equals 0, we can see how 4x1 minus 3y1 is equal to 0, and similarly how 4x2 minus 3y2 is equal to 0. This can of course be rearranged, and what I'm going to do is to rearrange them such that we have y1 equals and y2 equals. So when you do that, you can see we're going to get y1 equals 4/3 of x1 and y2 is equal to 4/3 of x2. Now that we have this, we're going to label these, let's say 1 and 2, so equation 1 and equation 2. Now what we're going to do is to consider the geometry that we have here and establish two relationships that we can find. So here, if we consider the point x1, y1 and we consider its distance from the origin, we can see that this distance here is going to be 1 plus 4. The 1 is coming from the central circle and the 4 is coming from the radius of this other circle. So now we can see that the distance of x1, y1 from the origin is 5 total units. Similarly, if we consider x2, y2, if we consider distance here, this is going to be 1 unit from this circle and this circle's radius is going to be 4 units. So therefore the total for this point as well is going to be 5 total units. So therefore we can say something like, from the diagram we can see that if we take the distance of the x1, y1 point from the origin, which is going to be 5, we can see that x1 squared plus y1 squared is going to be equal to 25. Now similarly, if we consider the other side, x2 squared plus y2 squared, we're going to see it's also equal to 25, so 5 squared. So we can see that x2 squared plus y2 squared is also equal to 25. So both of these share the condition that x1 squared plus y1 squared is equal to 25 and x2 squared plus y2 squared is also equal to 25. They have distance 5 from the origin. So now that we have this, what we're going to do next is to apply these equations that we have previously into these to eliminate either y1 or y2 and then simplify them down until we get x1 equals something or x2 equals something, and then we're going to find using this equation the corresponding value of y. So if we use, let's say we call this thing equation number 3, equation number 4, we can see by 1 and 3 that if we replace y1 with 4/3 of x1, we get x1 squared, and then plus y1 squared is going to become 4/3 x1 squared, which is going to be 16, divide by 9 x1 squared, and that's going to be equal to 25. Now if we add these two parts together, we can see if we take the common denominator of 9, we're going to get x1 times 9, so 9 x1 squared plus 16 x1 squared divided by 9 is going to be equal to 25. Now if we simplify this, we can see if we take this thing to this side, we're going to get a 9 times 25, and then on this side 9 plus 16 x squared is going to become 25x squared. So if we divide both sides by 25, we can see we get x1 squared equals 9. Now that means that x1 is equal to plus or minus 3. Now in this case, we can see that this equation and this equation have a symmetry. Similarly, this equation and this equation have a symmetry. And due to that, we can see that this x1 point and x2 point also have a symmetry. If this is plus a certain value, this is minus that same value. So therefore, we can apply a little logic here and say that the plus 3 case is corresponding to x1. So we can say something like x1 is equal to plus 3 case and x2 equal to minus 3 case. And now that we have this, we can solve for y1 and y2. So we can see here y1 and y2 are going to be corresponding to 4/3 of x1 and x2. So therefore, if we multiply this 3 by 4/3, we can see we're going to get 4. So therefore, we're going to have y1 is equal to plus 4 and y2 is equal to minus 4. So now we have the two centers of these two circles with a radius 4 units, with centers lying on the line 4x minus 3y equals 0 and touching the circle x squared plus y squared equals 1 externally. Now what we need to do is to find their equations. So to find the equations, we're going to go up into the diagram and we're going to label this one as C1, and then we're going to go up here to this part of the diagram and label this thing as C2. So now that we have that, we can say that C1 is given by something and C2 is given by something. Now what we need to do is to write the equations that they're given by. Now C1, the circle C1, has center x1, y1, which is 3, 4. And therefore, if we consider its equation, it's going to have x minus x1, which is x minus 3 squared, and y minus y1, which is going to be y minus 4 squared, and that's going to be equal to the radius squared. Now the radius in this case is 4, so therefore it's going to be equal to 4 squared. So if we write the equation of C1, C1 is going to be x minus x1, which is 3 squared, plus y minus y1, which is y minus 4 squared. That's going to be equal to the radius squared, which is going to be 16. Now if we take a look at C2, C2 has the similar radius of 4, but it has centers of negative 3 and negative 4. So therefore, if we do x minus x2 and y minus y2, we're going to get x minus negative 3, which is going to be x plus 3. So we have x plus 3 squared, and y minus y2, which is going to be y minus negative 4, which is going to be y plus 4 squared, and that's going to be equal to 16. Now I could have done my space management a little bit better. As you can see, I've run out of space almost. So I'm going to take this line up like this. I'm going to take this line to the left like this, and there. Now you of course can't do this. You have to, while you're writing the exam, you have to manage your space. Maybe I could have moved this line up by 1 and then I'd have had more space or something like this. But you yourself cannot fall to this kind of trap. You have to make sure you have enough space. If you don't have enough space, of course, there's no rule stopping you from just taking another paper and writing the rest of your solution there as well. However, I would recommend that you use the space provided. So there we go. That is the solution for this question. Now here it's important to note that the diagram gave us a lot of geometrical insight that we could use for our solution. If you didn't have this diagram, then you would be dealing with just numbers, and you would have something like x1 squared plus y1 squared equals 25, and then x1 plus y1, something like that. You would have some kind of relationship that you would have to solve. Or actually not x1 plus y1. x1 squared plus y1 squared equals 25, and then maybe you'd have that this equation here where y1 is equal to 4/3 x1, you'd have to substitute and then rearrange and do all sorts of things, and you wouldn't be able to easily figure out that one of these is going to be plus 3 plus 4 and the other was going to be symmetrically minus 3 minus 4. So for that reason, it's important that you draw the diagram, and then once you have the diagram, you can then refer back to the diagram using labelings and make your solution much simpler, take up less space, and be much more logical. Now finally, let's discuss the marks that you're going to get for your solution. at the top here, if you do draw a diagram, you're likely going to get 5 marks for the diagram, since the diagram contains a lot of important information that's going to be used in the rest of the question. So here, when you're drawing the diagram, it's important that you draw things like this thing correctly. This line here contains no y-intercept, therefore it must pass through the origin. This circle must be drawn uniformly. These two circles must also be drawn uniformly. You must draw the axes correctly. You probably want to draw with a compass for these two circles and such. And you need to label all of the points that you're referring to in your solution. So then you get 5 marks. For this bit where you define the 2 points, you're not going to get 5 marks. However, when you establish a relationship between y1 and x1 and y2 and x2, you're probably going to get 5 marks for that. Moving on, from the rest of the question, when you find the relationship between x1, y1 and the distance to the origin, as in you find x1, y1's distance from the origin is 5, and similarly x2, y2's distance from the origin is also 5, you're going to get 5 marks for that. And then, when you finally solve that using these equations up here, and you find the values of x1 and find that x1 could either be plus 1 or minus 1, plus 3 or minus 3, leading to x1 being plus 3 and x2 being minus 3, since one of these is on the plus side and the other is on the minus side and they're symmetrical, you're going to get 5 marks. And then finally, when you use this knowledge and the radius and all of that, in order to find the final equations of two circles, you're going to get another 5 marks there. So you can see across the board, the marks are distributed uniformly. However, you can see that certain points are necessary. You need to establish this relationship because this relationship here allows you to simplify down your equations that you get here into final answers. Furthermore, the diagram must be drawn correctly. You must draw straight lines straight using a ruler or something. You must draw these with compasses to make them nice and circular. All of that. You need to mark all of the things that you're drawing, and you need to mark all of the points that you're going to be using. So that's going to be all for this video. If you have any feedback, post them in the comments down below. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.